In 1979, the FBI launched a vast electronic surveillance operation at one criminal in particular, Allen Dorfman.
Allen Dorfman was the man that got things done, the power broker.
Allen Dorfman wasn't a mafioso. He wasn't even Italian. He was Jewish. And his weapon was not a gun, but a pen.
Dorfman was a white-collar type thug.
He had no real scruples or morals.
Dorfman's crime was to raid $1 billion pension fund for his mafia bosses.
The pension fund was a gold mine.
As the mafia's banker, he financed their huge casinos in Las Vegas.
He was a very powerful associate because he made money for it.
Dorfman was close to the mafia's heart and in the crosshairs of the FBI. This is the extraordinary story of how the FBI hunted Allen Dorfman, bugged his business, and caused one of the biggest disasters in mafia history. Allen Dorfman need not have been a mobster. After the Second World War, he returned to America a decorated Marine. But he could only find work as a women's self-defense instructor and sports coach, earning just $4,000 a year. Dorfman was going nowhere, and he wanted more. Luckily, he was close to one influential person who could fix him up: his stepfather. Paul "Red" Dorfman was a tough, old-school Chicago mobster. His power base was in the growing trade union movement, including the mighty Teamsters Union. By 1953, with 1.2 million members working in transport nationwide, a Teamsters strike could paralyze the United States. The Teamsters had what the mob liked: real muscle. An ambitious Teamsters official, Jimmy Hoffa, wanted to become president at the top of the powerful union. Red Dorfman agreed to help.
There was a lot of intelligence information that Hoffa had made accommodations with organized crime in order to rise to the power that he developed.
In return for supporting Hoffa, Red Dorfman wanted something back: a job for his son, running the Teamsters' lucrative insurance business. No matter that Allen Dorfman had no financial qualifications or insurance experience, he didn't even have an office. Such was the power of the mob that Dorfman's hastily set up insurance agency got the contract. The Teamsters employers now paid Dorfman's agency an insurance premium for every union man. And so, for new insurance executive Allen Dorfman, the good times began to roll.
He had very expensive clothes. I remember he wore what was clearly a very expensive camel hair coat. He drove expensive cars. He had a very nice house in Lincolnwood. He went out to eat at fancy restaurants. He had plenty of cash to spend.
The deal worked out well for both sides. Over the next 10 years, Allen Dorfman became a millionaire. And mob-back Jimmy Hoffa rose fast in the Teamsters Union. But there was a cloud on the horizon. In Washington, the authorities were increasingly concerned by the unholy alliance of organized crime and the labor movement. In 1957, the United States Senate McClellan Committee began investigating union officials and mob associates. That meant trouble for Jimmy Hoffa and Allen Dorfman. Government agents discovered that Allen Dorfman had made $3 million from Teamsters insurance policies. Half of it by wildly overcharging on the premiums. The high insurance fees were not illegal, and the committee could do nothing about it. But committee investigators did soon discover illegal practices. Dorfman had siphoned off over $330,000 in cash from his company for unspecified expenses, and Hoffa had been lent cash that was never returned. A young lawyer, Robert F. Kennedy, was the committee's legal counsel. He asked Hoffa to explain himself.
Did you borrow all this money on the same day, and you don't know what it was for?
What's for expenditures that I needed at that time? I can't recall offhand.
And this was in cash also?
That's right.
And no collateral, no note?
That's right.
And no interest paid?
That's right.
Has it been paid back?
No, it has not.
Although the committee strongly suspected that stolen cash was being used for illegal payoffs and kickbacks to union officials, they couldn't prove it. That left Hoffa and Dorfman at liberty to exploit the wealthy Teamsters Union on an unprecedented scale. Although the Teamsters insurance business was a good money spinner for Dorfman, it was dwarfed by the possibilities of the vast Teamsters pension fund. Millions of dollars in workers' contributions poured in every month. The question was, where to invest it? Other funds invested prudently, spreading risk, but Allen Dorfman helped Hoffa pour tens of millions of dollars of Teamsters loans into just one client's pocket, the mob.
Teamsters especially, the pension fund, was a gold mine. It was the goose that laid the golden egg.
The Central States Pension Fund earned the nickname the Mafia Bank. And what did the gangsters do with all these millions? They built casino hotels in the Nevada desert. Las Vegas.
The first casino out here, the Flamingo Hotel, was built by the mob. As a strip group, not all of it was mob money. Most of it was.
The Stardust, the Fremont, and the Desert Inn were all funded by multi-million-dollar loans from the Teamsters Pension Fund. And in the 1960s, these casinos were owned and controlled by the Mafia.
Dorfman was absolutely instrumental in that. He engineered, by and large, the mob's influence in the Las Vegas casinos and the purchase of those casinos with the hidden interests of the various mobsters.
Hoffa and Dorfman approved 60 loans totaling a mammoth $91 million on strangely favorable terms to the mob.
The people who got the loans did not have to pledge any collateral, did not have to have the normal background checks that a bank would have conducted before giving multi-million-dollar loans.
There was a reason for this lax lending policy. Every time they approved a loan, up to 10% was taken as a kickback by Hoffa and Dorfman.
Allen Dorfman arranged a lot of loans. He took a fee on every one of them.
The kickbacks could be huge.
If you want to put up a building, and it would cost with your profit, $900,000 to put it up, but you got to give me $100,000. You make your bid $1 million.
Everybody thought that was fine. There was enough money for everybody.
The Mafia generally didn't like to pay money back. But provided Hoffa and Dorfman got their kickback, they didn't seem to care if the Teamsters never saw their money again. Dorfman and Hoffa were riding high, but 1961 saw in a new government and the return of an old enemy. Robert Kennedy was appointed U.S. Attorney General. As the top law enforcement officer in America, Kennedy's stated goal was to break the grip of organized crime. He set about radically changing the Department of Justice and the FBI. Kennedy launched a new kind of investigative unit, a Department of Justice strike force aimed at union corruption. And Kennedy dramatically increased the number of lawyers in the organized crime and racketeering section from 17 to 63. One unit was very much at the forefront of the campaign.
It was called the Labor Rights Unit, and I was in it. And the press called it the Get Hoffa Unit.
To get Hoffa was harder than it sounds. In October 1962, the unit did prosecute Hoffa, alleging he'd received improper payments from a trucking company. But the verdict was far from certain. Then, they got lucky. During the trial, Hoffa played straight into the government's hands.
If he'd accepted the jury verdict, he would have been found not guilty, and it would have been potentially a major victory for him.
A powerful manipulator and used to getting his own way, Hoffa just couldn't leave the verdict to chance.
He had to fix the jury, and he got caught fixing the jury, and that's obstruction of justice, and then he was convicted.
A maximum one-year sentence suddenly grew a whole lot bigger. Hoffa's mob-style jewelry tampering had backfired badly.
Nobody should die that way.
I've never seen anything that horrific.
One of the duties of a pathologist is to determine the cause of death.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
Outside the district court building in the nation's capital, Teamster boss James Hoffa surrenders to U.S. Marshals to begin serving an 8-year prison term for jury tampering.
Hoffa was gone. But for at least one person, this was a great opportunity. Before he went to jail, Hoffa announced, "Allen speaks for me on all pension fund questions." In those few words, the one-time sports coach was made one of the United States' most powerful financiers. Allen Dorfman now controlled a vast $400 million mountain of money.
The title CEO of Crime, Inc. would be a good description of Dorfman, or perhaps a better one would be Chief Financial Officer of the mob. I don't think anybody could have done what he did because he had the skills and the character and the lack of morality to do what was necessary for the mob.
But Dorfman discovered he was not allowed complete control. Access to the pension fund was just too important to the mob. The Chicago outfit decided to safeguard the Mafia bank. They gave Dorfman an advisor, Joey the Clown Lombardo.
The outfit did not trust Allen Dorfman and therefore placed Lombardo in the position that he had, which was an overseer.
Joey the Clown Lombardo was a serious mobster. He may have earned his name joking around, but he was a shrewd businessman and a killer.
I don't think Lombardo respected anyone. I think he had a grudging respect for Dorfman for what he could do. But Joe Lombardo liked Joe Lombardo, and that was about the extent of the people he liked.
It was Lombardo who oversaw the Las Vegas casinos. And now, although he had no official position, guided Allen Dorfman at the Teamsters Pension Fund.
He did show up on almost a daily basis to find out exactly what Dorfman was doing and to provide guidance, to direct Dorfman to make sure that he did as the outfit wanted him to do.
That's the one person you don't hear Dorfman arguing much with.
But the two men got along well. With Lombardo's backing, Dorfman approved million-dollar loans designed to leach cash directly into mob hands.
It was no secret that he was in the pocket of organized crime. He was a tool of the Chicago outfit. They controlled Dorfman.
No matter that a string of businesses invested in by the Teamsters Pension Fund went bust, and millions of dollars was effectively stolen in the process.
Dorfman was a white-collar type thug. He controlled money. Dorfman would never be involved in a burglary or an armed robbery or an extortion. That's not what he did. He was a different kind of criminal.
Defaulted loans to just one businessman cost the pension fund $15 million. But Dorfman couldn't care less. He got paid thousands of dollars in a kickback on every one. Business was so good that he now crisscrossed the states in a private jet he'd bought from Frank Sinatra. But when one such deal and kickback went sour, the FBI pounced. In October 1972, the court in Chicago heard how businessman Leo Horvath had applied for a Teamsters loan of $1.5 million. He had personally paid Dorfman a $55,000 kickback in cash. 2 days later, Dorfman approved the loan. At last, this scam was exposed, and Dorfman was found guilty. It seemed the Mafia's banker was in real trouble. But for some reason, the trial judge sentenced Dorfman to just 1 year in federal prison. Far from being a killer blow to his career, it hardly even broke his stride.
In the 1972 fraud conviction, didn't rat on anyone, which probably enhanced his reputation with the mob at that time. And he did his thing and came out and kept on going.
With Lombardo behind him, Dorfman's looting of the Teamsters Pension Fund didn't merely continue uninterrupted, but shifted into high gear as never before. Between 1972 and 1976, he approved $186 million in loans to finance fevered mob development of Las Vegas casinos. $20 million went to Caesar's Palace alone, and $23 million to Circus Circus. And the kickback to Dorfman, 7% of Circus Circus Corporation shares, potentially worth millions. But the FBI hadn't given up the hunt for Dorfman. In 1974, they'd found enough evidence to charge Dorfman and Lombardo with milking the Teamsters pension fund of $1.4 million. Dorfman was again just a step away from a long prison sentence. Key witness for the prosecution was businessman Daniel Seifert, who had been talking to the feds. If Seifert testified, Lombardo and Dorfman were both going down. The Mafia didn't hesitate to protect their biggest source of ready cash.
They had no hesitation eliminating witnesses if it would keep them out of court.
One Saturday, Seifert went to his office to meet his wife. Mrs. Seifert was pushed at gunpoint into a washroom. Seifert made a run for it. The first shotgun blast failed to stop him, but a second blast to the chest brought him down. Finally, to leave no doubt, Daniel Seifert was shot at point-blank range. As Seifert fell, so did the court case. Lombardo and Dorfman walked free again. It was clear to the Department of Justice and the FBI that Joe Lombardo and the Chicago outfit would stop at nothing to keep Dorfman and the Mafia bank in business. And they were right. Even old friends were not safe. On the 23rd of December, 1971, Jimmy Hoffa had been given an early Christmas present. A pardon from President Nixon. But although released from prison, Hoffa also wanted something else, his old job back.
I have never sold a worker around. I have negotiated the best contracts in America. Nobody can deny it. They don't even try to deny it. I've got eyeglasses, teeth, pension funds, conditions, and the highest wages in the whole world for our people. Talk to our people. Let them be the judge whether or not I'm a labor leader or whether I'm a crook.
The Mafia bosses felt their money machine was working well and considered Dorfman to be an essential cog. The return of Hoffa was something they could do without. Hoffa now rounded angrily on the mob. He spoke openly in the papers and on radio and television about exposing mob corruption and getting the mob out of the Teamsters Union. He even threatened to stop the Mafia from using the pension fund.
Jimmy Hoffa sincerely thought of himself as a tough guy, as tough as anybody in the mob. He never thought that he would come to the end he came to at the hands of the mob.
On the 30th of July, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa went missing.
Hoffa was last seen alive at the fashionable Red Fox restaurant in a Detroit suburb. He waited there in vain to keep an appointment. Hoffa left his car in the restaurant car park when he vanished, and in spite of an intensive search around Detroit, there's been sight nor sound of him since.
The FBI put 200 agents on the Hoffa disappearance and spent millions to find him. To this day, his body has never been found. If the mob thought Hoffa's disappearance had blown the FBI off course, they were wrong. In 1978, the government began to form an attack plan to get rid of Allen Dorfman once and for all.
We were after Dorfman, make no mistake about it, because he was the gear that made everything run as far as controlling of the Central States Pension Fund.
Stopping Dorfman would not only cut off the Mafia's money supply. More than that, following the trail of dodgy loans would allow them to convict mobsters throughout the US.
If we penetrated Dorfman and his contacts, we could get to other aspects of his association, which would include the mob, which would include the Teamsters, and as it turned out, high-ranking government officials.
The FBI realized that snaring Dorfman was not going to be quick or easy. To have any chance of success, they would have to use surreptitious electronic surveillance far more extensively than ever before. The plan was to record all Dorfman's phone conversations with his associates in the hope that they would incriminate themselves.
That was a tremendous manpower drain, and it was really a fight to get the FBI at that time to agree to put that many people in the case.
FBI chiefs worried that penetrating Dorfman was looking just too expensive.
They were concerned as to how long it would continue, which was fairly perceptive on their part because we intended to continue it as long as we could.
Another obstacle was that just tapping Dorfman's phone calls was far from straightforward.
Each call that came in on a separate line could have been transferred to Allen Dorfman in his office. And therefore, we could not simply tap one line. We had to tap all lines going into that office.
The problem was that for wiretap evidence to be admissible at trial, they would need a court warrant for each individual line.
We were going to be forced to request the ability to tap into approximately 15 or 16 telephone lines.
But in the end, they decided they had to go for Dorfman. On the 29th of January 1979, a court gave permission for multiple wiretaps, and Operation Pendorf began. The FBI rented offices nearby so the telephone company could redirect the phone lines. Agents could monitor and record all of Dorfman's phone conversations. Immediately, his world opened up to them. On that very first day, they heard Dorfman brokering a $90 million deal for the mob concerning the Aladdin Casino Hotel, Las Vegas.
Dorfman's days, as best as we could tell, when he was in the office, when he was actually working and not playing golf, was mainly communicating with the gangsters, fulfilling their needs, a problem solver, influence peddling, everything you'd think a power broker in legitimate business would do today.
Just how far removed Dorfman was from legitimate business was shown only a few days later. On February the 2nd, agents were stunned when Dorfman's conversations involved loan sharking, a takeover of the Teamsters pension fund, the unlawful use of gold certificates, and even a plan to kill the Teamsters president. And that was just one day's work for Allen Dorfman. Over the next 6 months, the FBI monitored 112,000 phone calls, recorded over 3,500, and focused on nearly 1,000 conversations. But it wasn't enough. The FBI needed to hear all of Dorfman's business conversations, not just when he was on the phone. To do that, they would have to bug his office.
The information that we developed on the telephones led us to have sufficient probable cause to ask the courts for the ability to put a microphone in his office.
But installing a secret microphone infringes a citizen's right to privacy. Getting court approval for this would be even more difficult.
Everyone was a little bit more skittish about that because the expectation of privacy was of considerable concern. So it was often much more difficult to get a bug because you had to show more to satisfy the officials in Washington that this was something that should be done.
Doug Roller won the argument in Washington and persuaded a federal judge to grant the warrant. With this to back them up, all the FBI now had to do was break into Dorfman's office.
We entered Dorfman's office surreptitiously late at night because we had an informant who worked for Allen Dorfman's office. We simply had my informant rent a parking place under the building, and we drove into the underground parking, and went up into the building and went into the office.
Agents made 7 night raids to plant 2 microphones. Now, rather than his businesslike telephone manner, they got the real Allen Dorfman.
But all you get from him is promises and bullshit. All I know is we ain't got a fucking thing. Now where the fuck are we going?
He was very gruff, a lot of profanities, and very arrogant, and became angered when what he wanted was not being done.
Did you ever give me a fucking dime, Morris? You ever give Hum a fucking dime? If you did, I don't know about it. And if you did, I don't give a fuck, because I didn't get nothing.
He did not mince words, and most of his conversations were laced with profanity.
But when the FBI microphones overheard Dorfman's meetings with Joey the Clown Lombardo, the agents heard the usually arrogant loudmouth transform.
He would walk around Las Vegas shouting orders like a Marine sergeant. And then when he met the mob boss in Chicago, he was a meek, mild businessman.
What did he get out of it? I would say he got somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes. Yeah, got 3 and 5. 25% beyond? That's right. That's the player we want right away. Well, you can make the demands. Make the demands. Now he's in trouble.
Our opinion of Joe Lombardo actually improved as we listened to the conversations. We overheard conversations most mornings where they were reading the Wall Street Journal, they were discussing the articles, and really there was no difference in the understanding of the material on the part of Lombardo as compared to Dorfman.
But there was a significant difference between Joey Lombardo and Allen Dorfman, as Lombardo clearly revealed on tape in a meeting with Morris Schenker, a Dorfman associate.
Allen's meek and Allen is harmless, but the people behind him are not meek and harmless. You know what I mean? And I'll tell you one thing. He says you're 72. No, I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you. If they come back and tell me to give you a message, and if you wanted to fire him, I assure you that you will never reach 73.
What the FBI had long suspected was now admitted on tape. Joey Lombardo was a mob enforcer and would stop at nothing to back up their money man, Allen Dorfman. Over 2,000 reels of Dorfman at his office, on the phone and in meetings, were recorded and transcribed. Even though he was unaware of this, Dorfman seemed careful and guarded.
Allen Dorfman, like a lot of the gangsters, didn't think that they would be caught. They thought they were too smart.
But Allen Dorfman made a mistake. With the mics on and the reels rolling, Dorfman was chatting with associates when he referred to an incriminating meeting. Thanks to the wiretaps, a jaw-dropping and damning story unfurled. Teamsters president, Roy L. Williams, had a problem with a government bill to deregulate the trucking industry. Any breakup of the Teamsters monopoly meant a loss of money and power for the union. Another person with a problem was Howard W. Cannon, the powerful senator for Nevada. Land developers were eyeing a plot next to his exclusive Las Vegas country club home. The planned 9-story apartment blocks would spoil his view and damage property values. The vacant lot was owned by the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund. At a meeting on Wednesday, January the 10th, 1979, Cannon and Williams met with power broker Allen Dorfman. Senator Cannon asked Dorfman whether he might arrange to sell him the 6 acres abutting his fancy home. Williams asked Senator Cannon whether he might arrange to personally oversee the trucking deregulation bill. They agreed a deal, in effect, a bribe. And to bribe a U.S. senator is a crime. In Washington, Cannon delivered on his part of the bargain. As chairman, he steered the trucking bill into his Commerce Committee, where it was delayed and watered down. But Dorfman found to his dismay that he couldn't deliver on his side. Recent legislation had stopped him dealing in land as he pleased. The bugs heard Dorfman vent his frustration.
In the bug, Dorfman is going on about, how terrible this was. These guys are pieces of shit. And in the old days, we could have just had the Teamsters out there bought in and give it to them. But we can't do that now because everyone's watching us.
A hidden microphone in Dorfman's office on May the 21st, 1979, captured the moment when Senator Cannon called to ask how the land deal was coming along. Embarrassed, Dorfman could only apologize for the delay. After he hung up, Dorfman announced to an associate,
"That was Senator Cannon."
How's he doing?
Huh? We fucked him around like no man has ever been fucked around.
He took care of deregulation, didn't he?
Hmm?
Did he take care of deregulation?
Of course, but we ain't fulfilled our commitment to him yet. I'm surprised he still even talks to me.
Senator Cannon never did get the real estate he wanted. But the FBI did get what they wanted. An incriminating tape recording. A clear record that Dorfman was involved in bribing a U.S. senator. At the beginning of 1980, after a record-breaking 13 months, the Chicago strike force went public with Operation Pendorf. The top-secret surveillance had worked. Senator Cannon was quick to defend himself from press accusations of any wrongdoing.
I unequivocally deny the implications of news reports that there is any connection between my handling of trucking legislation in the Senate and the resolution of a land use dispute in Nevada involving a homeowners group of which I was one member.
If Cannon was allowed to get away with it, Dorfman was not. The man who had stolen the Teamsters millions was still in the sights of Chicago strike force leader Doug Roller.
We felt by the time the wiretap was over that we had a great deal of evidence to put together a prosecution. I felt we had an ironclad case.
But though it seemed that at last the FBI had Allen Dorfman on the ropes, he appeared unconcerned.
Dorfman in court was most of the time an arrogant gentleman. Although he was physically in court, present, that he was aloof to what was going on.
Yet despite the cool veneer, Dorfman was feeling the pressure.
At one occasion during the course of the trial, Allen introduced his son to me and stating that this is the motherfucker that wants to put me in jail. I just told Allen, you're a real class act, and walked away.
Dorfman faced the possibility of a long sentence, but he may have had reason to believe help was at hand. Because Dorfman could rely on more than just his lawyers. To protect their banker, the Mafia were helping the jurors come to a sensible decision.
Several jurors received early morning telephone calls from someone with a deep, gravelly voice who made insinuations about not knowing the whole story of the case.
When the jurors reported the illegal phone calls to the judge, he immediately sequestered them. They were held in a hotel, under guard, cut off from any outside interference. For once, the underworld's attempts at jury tampering failed. Traditional mob methods just didn't work anymore. No shotgun blasts could silence a witness. As the Pendorf tapes were played in court, the battle lines with the Mafia were redrawn. The accused had now become witnesses against themselves. As Dorfman's tape played, profanity, anger, and frustration resounded in court.
You know, when this commitment was arranged, Roy, you sat in the same fucking room. You made the same fucking commitment I made. Now, the property's gone. Fuck it. Let it go. But I'll tell you something. I don't give a shit if you have a deregulation shoved up your fucking ass or whatever happens.
Best evidence you can use in court is the defendant's own words. You cannot undo your words. You might try to explain them away, but if there are enough words there, you're sunk.
On December the 15th, 1982, Allen Dorfman, charged with conspiring to bribe Senator Howard Cannon, received the jury's verdict. Guilty. Operation Pendorf had struck its target, and it was a devastating blow. It was a grim Christmas in Chicago for 60-year-old Allen Dorfman. Although he was released on bail, the new year might bring him a 55-year prison sentence. But sentencing was not for 8 weeks. Plenty of time to cut a deal.
Facing a prison term would not have been something that Dorfman would have looked forward to with his high lifestyle. all the accoutrements of the rich that he had would all be taken away in prison.
There was now concern at the highest levels of the mob that Dorfman might not be tough enough to accept his fate and would negotiate with the Justice Department to reduce his sentence.
There had to be fear that in order to keep his sentence down or to keep from even being put in prison, Allen Dorfman might want to cooperate with the federal government.
Aging, out of power, and facing prison. If ever there was a good time for Dorfman to roll over on his mob friends, this was it.
The number of secrets that Allen Dorfman could have told us, it just boggled the mind. I believe that he could have helped us to completely cripple Cleveland, Chicago, Kansas City, Las Vegas, and maybe Los Angeles. He knew everything.
He heard things he shouldn't be hearing. He's seen things he shouldn't have been seeing.
We felt he would be vulnerable to an offer to diminish his prison sentence in return for his cooperation. Never got that far because the mob was thinking the same thing.
Suddenly, the man who'd loyally bankrolled the mob for years seemed a dangerous liability. Mob bosses decided to put out a contract on Allen Dorfman. On the 20th of January, 1983, Allen Dorfman and an old friend and associate went out to eat at the Hyatt Hotel in Lincolnwood, northwest Chicago. The lunch date turned out to be a date with destiny. Allen Dorfman had just kept 30 years of mob secrets the hard way.
And it's a part and parcel of life in the United States that close association with La Cosa Nostra often leads to a sudden death.
Allen Dorfman's death was a watershed for both the U.S. Mafia and U.S. law enforcement.
I believe it was one of the largest and perhaps most successful investigations of organized crime undertaken during this period.
Without Dorfman, the Mafia's money supply was suddenly cut off. This crippled the mob, and they never recovered.
No one replaced Allen Dorfman. No one replaced Allen Dorfman at all. They did not have access to that bank, and it was part of the death knell of that easy money for the mob.
Operation Pendorf had also done something else. It had proved the power of mass electronic surveillance and revolutionized the use of bugs and wiretaps.
Surreptitious electronic surveillance changed the playing field forever in favor of the government.
From now on, over and over again, electronic surveillance of a large number of mob figures and their operations would lead criminals to condemn themselves, in their own words, on tape. There was nowhere to hide, no witnesses to silence. The FBI had at last found a way to break the Mafia.